after the dynasty's era history provides us with information which we depend on in the study of the history of Egypt and its civilization. That information is inscribed on the walls of the temples, on the tombs, paintings, statues, and on papyrus. We cannot state anything definite about the age of the pre-dynastic era from the civilization of the Helwan crematorium and Marmada and Badari around 5000 BC up to the Gurzean civilization in 3400 BC. Little is known about that civilization. Egyptian civilization did not start at the advent of the first dynasty in 3200 BC. But Egypt at that time had largely developed many of the elements of civilization. Methods of agriculture and irrigation were advanced to some extent, and the mining industry, especially gold and copper from the eastern desert mines. The cutting of hard stones and the statues industry were advanced, and there was an administrative system and special traditions in art and religion. Egypt was adopting the deity of whoever was sitting on the throne. Thus, the age before the pre-dynastic period laid the different foundations in management and religion, and paved the way for Egypt to start its historic age. The pharaohs inherited a highly advanced scientific, religious, and technological civilization in construction, medicine, astronomy, and in several other sciences with which they started a new age in the history of humanity. Such civilization started at the top, but it did not leave conclusive evidence about its origins and source. We see in the concrete facts of what the pharaohs had left and what the Greeks recorded about them that the pharaohs had an absolute science, whereas we in the 20th century are trying to reach it with the help of the science and knowledge available. They had knowledge of life and beyond, knowledge of the universe and many of its secrets, and most importantly, the immortality of the soul and the certainty of resurrection after death. It is well established and known scientifically that religion was the real source of all that the pharaohs did. In the era of building the pyramids, the official religion of all individuals had become a duty, an obligation. The people were directing their religion to Sun Ra, which symbolized life. The Pharaonic Book of the Dead consisted of 190 chapters, and the contents of that book are prayers and calls for those who had left for the other world, the world of immortality and bliss. This belief in resurrection and immortality did not come to them from a vacuum, but from an assured conviction whose source and origin is not mentioned. It was stated in the Papyrus of Turin that the Egyptians who ruled before the first dynasty were considered semi-gods and the followers of Horus. The Egyptian historian Minutin mentions the semi-gods who were preceded by the gods' rule on earth. In one of the famous plates in the Cairo Museum showing Narmer, the first king of the first dynasty, we see his victories over his enemies. That plate shows how Horus, the worshipped god, defeated the king's enemies and helped to capture 6,000 prisoners. Horus appears in the shape of a falcon, holding in his hand a rope with which he is dragging one of his enemies, and above him there are 6 papyrus rods, each of which represents 1,000 enemies. The representation of the king by the god Horus had been deeply rooted for generations and continued to be the cornerstone of Egyptian civilization. The king was in charge of the country under the guidance of the god Horus, who ruled justly among the people. He kept the peace and helped people to perform their religious duties. In the Museum of Leningrad, there is a papyrus, number 1116, a testament from the king Akstoy to his son, Merika Ra. In that papyrus we read tips and directions from the king to his son. After death there is a divine court before which man stands, and nothing helps him there except his good deeds. The king concludes his advice to his son by urging him to obey and fear God, because God knows the secrets and what is hidden. He also reminds him to work for the hereafter and to perform a lot of worship. Ancient Egyptian mythology states that the creation and the creator were the basis on which was built the civilization of the ancient Egyptians. They considered that concept to be the most important event in ancient Egyptian history. Their interests were focused on what is right and on the divine justice established by God. The ancient Egyptian texts are full of the doctrines of the ancient Egyptian and the beginning of creation and how it had happened. You might like to refer to the chapter, The Puzzles, in my book, The Absolute Truth. The myths in all their sources are consistent that there is one first creator who created everything out of water, which is the origin of everything. One of these myths mentions that the blue lotus was the first thing that emerged from water, and Atun-Ra, the sun god, the source of life, was sitting on it. Surah, Hud, v7. The first gods or angels mentioned by the pharaonic myths are Osiris, Isis, and their son Horus, the third hypostasis divine person according to the teachings of the priests. The brother of Osiris is Set, in whom the factors of evil and envy are represented. That is a divine sunnah, a path, as I have already mentioned. Osiris was a just ruler who was assassinated by the forces of evil and envy represented in his brother, and he becomes king of the dead. Horus sat on the throne of his father. Then a war between Horus and his uncle flared up, and Horus won the war. Thus, Egyptian mythology was based on the concept of good and evil, and the triumph of right over wrong. The myths say that after the Creator filled the sky with gods, meaning the angels of high status, and the other subordinate angels, God created man, breathed life into him, and set a land for him to live on, and covered it with trees, fruit, and flowers. He created the seas, the fish, the insects, the animals, and breathed life into them. The pharaonic legends say that when God revealed to his creatures, they glorified and praised him and requested his continued justice. Among the numerous names the ancient Egyptians had for the Creator is the name, the Innovator of the Earth. The question that arises here is, are these beliefs pagan, or are they religious concepts in the sense that we know about religions? There is no doubt that these are religious concepts which are consistent with our understanding of religious beliefs. The fantasy of an author of a legend cannot discover the truths of revelation and knowledge without a teacher. It is certain that the gods were living creatures that were created, and they left their mark. The ancient Egyptians and the Greeks testified to their presence. There are remains and legends in the four corners of the earth, and there are also the sacred books which we understand from their teachings that since man existed on this earth, God the Great and the Almighty sent him those who could guide and teach him the principles of his religion and worldly life.